Hey everybody, this is Perch, and this is a bit of a nuanced point, and those always tend to be the ones that I find most frustrating from my perspective when I do videos and it contains a debatable point or a nuanced point, something that's very tricky, kind of, and also very your mileage may vary, because people seem to struggle with those, and I'm not blaming any of you, the audience, the listeners here, but those are the ones that are the hardest to make the point across, and you find yourself arguing all these tangents, which really doesn't get you anywhere. But let's give it a shot anyway with this, because there's a question that came up that I don't agree with the conclusion of this question, but I understand where the person's coming from. And this is where the nuance comes in. This is where you have to kind of look at this from a bunch of different angles. And the question is basically this: are comics always meant to be a second job? Meaning not the primary way of earning money. That comics are kind of by their nature, and especially by the change of print and everything else, are they meant to be a hobby? Are they meant to be something that you have a core job and this is a thing you do at night because you want some creative expression? Maybe a lot of what we talk about, focus about, complain about, worry about can be answered by it's a hobby. It's something people do in their pastime. So it's an interesting question because there's there's elements of truth to that hit different categories. One of those is the pay in comics is really, by most counts, not enough for it to be a primary job. You have to basically have other jobs, secondary job. You have to be supported by a spouse. You have to have a side hustle going on that's making as much as your primary hustle. I mean, with me, and I'm not in comics. I'm a retailer, which is in comics, but not in comics, but sort of in comics, whatever you want to call it. It's been a secondary job most of the time. I had to have other jobs that supported it. I mean, I was struck by the fact that I did a high-paying consulting job that paid what that took a couple weeks, and it paid what the shop makes in a year in profit. And that's, that by its nature indicates that, maybe comics is not a primary job. But that, to me, and I've done a lot of videos on this, that feels broken. It's hard for me to wrap my head, and this is where maybe I get turned around. It's hard for me to wrap my head around a business, an industry, something that generates IP that, puts off billions of dollars in merchandise and in movies and in all these other things. And yet the source point, the origin point of this IP is, I mean, people are making nothing. There was a thread, we'll talk about it in their video, but where, page rates really haven't gone up. In fact, they've gone down over 30 years. And in that kind of environment, it's hard to make the claim. I mean, if you're giving career advice at a school to somebody in college and they're saying, my hope is that I will be a comic artist, you have to, if in good conscience, you have to tell them, make sure you have some backup plans, make sure you have some other ways to make money, because it's, you'll have to struggle to get to where you want to go. Now, there's obviously successful people in comics that make a very good living and great, but the vast majority is underwater. And I think that's broken. And so I have like I said at the beginning, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusion of this question, because I feel like if you turn around and you accept that, if you say, "Yep, I guess this is just how it's going to be. In order to kind of make it in this industry, you're going to have a second job because, you're not going to be able to support yourself." You know, well, was it 90% of the people are going to need some other kind of hustle in order to make ends meet. And if I accept that as true, it feels like I'm accepting a system that's broken, and then the system doesn't get fixed, and the system badly needs to get fixed. So that's what I say. It's a complicated topic, and I'm very interested to see the kind of comments that come out on this one. I think that comics have put themselves a little bit in this position. I think if you were to look at comics, and I've gotten different opinions on this. I have asked this question before: was it possible to make a good living in comics in the '80s, or was it more likely that you could make a good living on comics in the 80s than in the 2020s? And the answer generally is yes, it was easier. Now, a lot of things were different in terms of kind of the business and how it was structured and job security and funding. All these kinds of other pieces were different. But it was, by and large, people say it was easier. Doesn't mean people were getting rich back then, but there were fewer. I mean, it's the amount of GoFundMe's and calls for money from people who are not unknowns. I mean, they do it too, but names, people who are broke, people who are struggling to make ends meet. Sometimes by their own means, sometimes because of choices they've made, but other times because of the way the business is structured. All that screams, this is a pastime. This is a lifestyle choice. If you're going to sign up to this, you are signing up to either having a second job or figuring out a way to live, meager. And I think that there's probably a lot of reality to that statement, but that doesn't make it good. That doesn't make it right, and that doesn't make it something that people just have to kind of shrug their shoulders and accept. There's a thread going on once talking about it's not. I forget who initiated, but a number of comic creators weighed in, saying you've got to have some secondary source of income, and maybe it's related, maybe it's selling comic art, which you could argue is part of the business, or maybe it's you're doing creative work for game companies or other things. But a lot of it was generally accepted that this was normal. If you're going to be in comics, you're going to have other sources, especially if you're starting out, and even when you get far enough along, it's important for the industry, or it's important for your survival in the industry, I guess. So then I get to the other thing that was kind of inferred in that question, which is, do we, the customers, the consumers, the community of comics, do we have a different perspective on everything if we accept the fact that the pay in comics is, generally speaking, not enough to have it be a primary job? Do we accept that as does it make it so that when we see maybe errors in the comic or different kinds of things, do we go, well, nobody's paying really much for this, so what you get what you pay for, so to speak? I don't think so. The challenge is, comic books are a commercial product. It's now everybody can complain about anything, of course, but I think there's a big difference. Like, you do not see people who write fan fiction. You don't see a group of people angrily critiquing the fan fiction, unless you're that Comics Nix guy, and that person's insane. But generally, you don't see a lot of critique on fan fiction or passion projects or things that are put out that are, not commercial products. And in some cases, even if they're commercial, but it's more individual. Like, for example, people don't go into art galleries and see the paintings that a bunch of local artists have done, and and sit there and aggressively critique them. They don't start threads about this stuff. But comic books aren't that. Comic books are sold in stores. They're mass produced. They're part of a chain of product that's gone on for a century, and as a result, it does lead to critique. It does lead to criticism. And how much the creative team is being paid, how much the people involved are being paid, really doesn't matter too much. If it's built and produced like a commercial product that's on the shelf that is mass marketed, which comic books are. I mean, even if marketing is terrible, it still fits in that realm. Then that doesn't mean that everybody. Put it this way: if all the creators involved, like if the first page of the comic showcased what people were paid in order to make it, I don't think it would cause anyone to go, well, I mean, I can't insult Squirrel Girl now. I mean, the people who are doing this were paid below the poverty line. That this was, in some cases, this comic here is below minimum wage kind of rates. So I mean, I'm not going to critique it. No, that nobody would do that because it's still positioned as a mass market product. It's positioned as an entertainment vehicle for you to consume. It's a big difference between an indie movie that somebody makes kind of on their own dime, own time, and they show friends in their, in their neighborhood downstairs in the screening room versus a film that goes out into the movie theaters. The second it goes out into mass production, it's going to be something people are going to want to comment on and critique. The rest is kind of irrelevant. So this whole topic is weird. It makes my head hurt. Because I think there's just so many angles, I think there should be more money in comics. I've continued to say that. I think there's been some channels who have made fun of me for saying that, going, why would you pay these people, more when they're doing subpar work? But the challenge is if you never pay more, you're never going to get higher end people. You're never going to grow the creative pool. People who are really strong, really creative, really talented are going to either migrate away from comics to something that pays them more, or it's, you get those unicorns out there where it truly is a passion product and they're maybe independently wealthy and they don't care and they're doing their thing because they love it. But either way, that's not a healthy system to build on. So there needs to be more money. If you want better quality in comics, you're going to have to put more money into it. I don't, and by the way, it's a really hard problem because you need to put more money into it while simultaneously lowering the cost of goods to the market because the cost of goods are too high for the market to sustain. So that's a Gordian knot right there. I mean, good luck. But in terms of does it change anything to recognize and realize that comics may be a hobby or a pastime or a second job for some? I mean, it's like I said, it makes my head hurt. So like I said, I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on it. I mean, especially for comic creators, and there's several out there who are work all day to do this kind of stuff. It's no second job for them. I mean, they're working their ass off to do this comic. I mean, this is where it's all backward. I feel though, I went ahead and I got this question. It like I said, it hurt my head. I thought about it for a while. I wanted to talk it through because I do want to hear what you guys are saying in the comments. But also, this feels like it's nosing in on a pretty important fundamental point to kind of comics and the business in general. It feels like we're tapping into something that is fundamental here. And if we don't address it, if we don't pick it up and deal with it, then this is one of those clues. It's like the canary in the coal mine. This whole topic, this whole question, is one of those that if we ignore it, it's not going to go away. And if we ignore it completely, it feels like we're going to keep slipping into problems, and then we're not going to know what to do with those problems. Anyway, I've talked enough about this. Let me know your thoughts on this topic because it's a weird one. And the one thing I can say, I'm willing to bet very few people in the comments, very few of you are going to say, yeah, if I knew that nobody got paid anything, I wouldn't complain as much. I'm pretty sure that's a no-go in any event. But let me know what you think. And yeah, my head hurts. Does your head hurt? Yeah, probably. Thanks for listening.